Hello and welcome to this introduction to Microsoft Power Automate. This video we're going to do a brief overview of the interface and what Power Automate is. So Microsoft Power Automate is a cloud-based workflow automation tool that is used to move data back and forth, to automate approval flows, to basically to make things that are repetitive tasks in your daily work life a whole lot easier, and to improve your efficiency and output of your daily work. So let's start by walking through the user interface. So when you first log into Power Automate, you go to make.powerautomate.com is the new URL that you would go to. You'll need a school or organization Microsoft account in order to get full access to the Power Automate, in order to subscribe to the levels that give you full access to everything. You can access the basic Power Automate system using a Microsoft personal account. But if you decide that you want to upgrade and get full access to all the connectors, to all the features that are available with a paid license, or with a license that's included with something like Dynamics or M365, then you would need to have a organizational account. A personal account can't be used for that unless your personal account is invited to become a member of an organization. So when you first log in, you're greeted with this screen here that kind of walks through some of the quick starts and things like that. And I'll go through each of the sections here. At the top right, you'll have your user information and settings, a little bit of help here. If you have access to more than one environment in Power Automate, say for instance you have a personal environment, you have a developer environment, maybe a test environment, whatever it might be that's been set up, you can switch from environment to environment within this interface part right here. Then there's a search bar that'll let you search through all the connectors and templates and things like that that are available in Power Automate. And then over here to the left is you have your main menu. You have the home button, which will bring you back to this screen here. One of the things that Power Automate gives you access to is approval workflows. If you have any approvals that are pending your sign-off, they'll be accessible through this approvals section, menu item. Then you have the My Flows menu item, which you use to access any of the flows that you have access to, whether they're ones that you've created yourself or ones that have been created and shared with you by other people, or shared with you, yeah. Then there's the create, if you want to create a new Power Automate flow. If you want to start with a template of some kind, and there are thousands of templates available, and I'll kind of look through some of those here in a minute. You can access them through the templates menu item. Connectors are the connections that are created between your Power Automate instance and external systems. So, maybe you're connecting to Outlook or to OneDrive or to Google Docs or to Salesforce or an Oracle database or a SQL Server database or whatever it might be that you're connecting to either get or retrieve or pass data. Those are all handled through the connectors. The data section is used for accessing things like a Dataverse environment if you have one connected to this environment. You can also use it to look at your existing connections, any custom connectors that you've created, or any gateways that you've created to on-prem environments. They're all accessible under the Data tab. The Monitor tab you use for monitoring the flows as they run. So there are cloud-based flows, there are desktop-based flows, and then there are machines that you might have access to run Power Automate remotely on a desktop environment. You work with those menu items. If you pay for an advanced license, you can get access to AI Builder. It's basically a simple to use implementation of Azure AI. There are a number of different features there, simple models that they have in place or workflows that are already in place that you just kind of plug some data into to train it. Those are accessible to AI Builder, and that's a topic for a whole nother video. Process Advisor is a fairly new feature. It's something that can be used to analyze workflows of various employees or workers and suggest ways that their workflow can be improved or automated using Power Automate. It's still a fairly new feature, and it gets pretty in depth. So that would be a topic for a whole nother video in the future. Solutions. So again, if you have a paid license, you have access to Power Automate solutions, which kind of work like other solutions for developers, where you can group various flows together into a common solution. And again, that's an advanced topic for another time. And then access to the various learning. There's a lot of tutorials and videos that they have available to walk you through how to work through various things in Power Automate. And they're all accessible here under the Learn button. So the main screen itself, when you get here on the home screen, the first section here gives you quick access to a number of templates, highlighted templates. This will change from time to time, what you'll see here. But the way all the templates that you'll see here work, they all show up the same way. So you'll have a couple of icons at the top, which kind of highlight what connectors will be needed for this particular template. So in this particular case, this one uses Outlook and OneDrive. Then there'll be the title, the name for the template. There'll be a template or who it was created by. So templates can be contributed by Microsoft. They can be contributed by the community. They can be contributed by vendors for various things. So you'll see here who it was that contributed the template to the list. And you can contribute your own templates for the community to share with other people as well. That's something you can do. At the bottom left, you'll see what type of template it is or what type of flow it is. In this particular case, it's automated. So we'll talk through the various types of Power Automate flows later, but there are 4 or 5 different types. The basic ones are automated. In this particular case, with all the templates that show up here, it just means that it's some event triggers it, something makes it happen. And then in the bottom right, you'll see the number of times that this template has been used by people to implement their own flow. So in this particular case, it's almost 170,000 people have taken this template and have created their own flow from it. And they'll have a couple of different categories here. So, in that particular case, it was emails. Here's files and documents. And then if you go into the templates page, you'll see a bunch of different categories and flows underneath them, or the templates that are underneath them. And then again, you've got some quick access to some learning things. These will take you out to the Microsoft Learn site so that you can go through various training courses that they suggest to you. And then this links to various documentation pages, as well as what's new kind of thing to walk you through some of the new features and blog articles that are out there. So this is the home screen. And then, of course, regular menu down at the bottom there. So the next thing I want to do is jump over to the templates page here real fast, just to highlight a little bit more about that. So I mentioned, there's be a number of different topics at the top here. And you can actually see the whole list of template topics here. If you want to implement a topic or implement one of the templates, you just find the one that you want to run through, and then you just click on it. And it'll basically walk you through in wizard format, setting up the template and implementing it in your own personal environment. In this particular case, you'll set up a schedule, you'll connect it to your Outlook.com account, and that'll be it. So let me jump over here to the connectors. So the connectors is broken up to a couple of different categories. You'll see the newest templates or the newest connectors at the top. Then you'll see connectors from various sources. In this particular case, these are independent publisher connectors. Those are ones that have been created by external people outside of Microsoft and then shared with people to use. And then you can see the full list of connectors here. So the biggest thing to remember about connectors is there's 2 or rather 3 different tiers of connectors. So first there's the common connectors. Those are the ones that are available to accounts at all levels. In this particular case, things like Outlook and SharePoint, RSS feeds, Power BI. The next 2 tiers are kind of grouped together. You'll see them tagged with the premium tag. So those might be either connectors that have been created by Microsoft or a vendor. in which case, might be, for instance, here, let me find one that isn't actually Microsoft created. So for instance, we have the Adobe Creative connector here. This allows you to connect to the Adobe Creative Cloud, and this is a connector that was created and provided by Adobe for Microsoft to use with Power Automate. And again, you'll see those kinds of things tagged with the premium tag. And then you'll see ones like AccuWeather here that'll have the independent publisher, which basically that means that it was a custom connector that somebody else created and then has shared with the community. In all these cases, these connectors that are tagged with a premium require a paid account. Now, it might be that's an account that you pay for, or an account that came with something like Dynamics or something like that. But either way, the base tier does not have access to any connector that is created or that is tagged with a premium tag. And there are hundreds of connectors. I think right now there's over 700 different connectors. Might be more than that, but last time I looked, it was like around 700. But you can see there's a lot of variety in the things that you can connect to, whether it be, databases, web APIs, applications of various kinds. For instance, DocuSign, Dynamics connectors to the various types of Dynamics, Encodian, Envoy, Eventbrite. So there's all kinds of different connectors that you can use to connect to various systems to implement your various flows. So let's go over now to the create screen. And I'll kind of talk you through the types of cloud or types of flows that exist. So I mentioned earlier the automated cloud flow. So that means that it's triggered by an event. An event might be, you receive an email or a calendar invite, or a file gets dropped in OneDrive, or somebody creates a record in Dynamics, or, there's almost no limit on the type of things that might trigger something. All it has to do is have a connector that supports it in one way or another. There are the instant cloud flows. That's basically you click a button and something happens. One of the things that Power Automate provides is both a web UI that you can access through here, but also there is a mobile app that you can install on Android and iOS devices, which basically literally will provide you with a button that you can push to trigger a flow to happen. One of the things you can do with a button triggered flow or an instant cloud flow is you can have a list of parameters that gets passed into the flow. It might be a string or a number or an image file or some other file. There's not a lot of options with that, but there are a few things that you can pass in as parameters to run into the flow. There are the scheduled cloud flows, and that's basically, you set it up to run on a schedule, whether it's once a day, once an hour, once a minute, once a week. So just basically it keeps running every so often. There are desktop flows. So while Power Automate is a cloud hosted or a cloud hosted application, it does have the ability to install an instance of itself on a desktop app or a server on your on-prem network, or in a VM or something like that. And then what you can do is you can have events in the cloud trigger the desktop flows to run. So it might be maybe, you get an email into your Outlook account, it goes out and triggers something on a VM somewhere on your network prem to maybe go grab that email and take the file off of it and put the file into a network share somewhere. Something like that. There's all kinds of things that you can do. One of the most important things to remember is that desktop flows, unless you run them manually, they are always triggered from the cloud. So you can't have flows that just sit on your desktop and run based on events that happen on a desktop. And there are a lot of limitations around desktop flows again as well, and that's not something I'll get into in the details, but the short version is basically it needs to have a VM that nobody's using at the moment in order to run in most cases. Otherwise, there can be issues. It's also something that's only available with a paid tier of Power Automate. You have to pay for the RPA license which is starts with the $40 per month license. And then there's a Process Advisor flow, and again, that's another one that's only available with the premium tiers. And basically, that's part of the flows that I mentioned here with Process Advisor. Lets it analyze what somebody's doing on their machine and kind of look for ways to automate their daily tasks. But again, that's another in-depth topic that's for a whole nother video sometime in the future. So from this screen, you can either start with a blank flow of some kind, or you can again have access to the various templates from this screen as well. And creating a flow is very easy. Just click on this, give it a name, and then you have to tell it what the trigger is going to be. So every flow starts with a trigger of some kind. So for automated cloud flows, I talked about it's got to be some event of some kind. For incident cloud flows, it won't have a trigger. Well, I mean, you'll define what any parameters might be that you would use with the button trigger. For scheduled cloud flows, this would be the point where you tell it how often you want it to run, that kind of thing. In this particular case, you can search through all the triggers. Let's say when a file is created. So you can just type in some text and it'll bring back all the various triggers that kind of relate to it. So in this case, we'll say when a file is created on our personal OneDrive, and we'll do create. So at this point, what it would do if you have not already created a connection to that application, at this point, it would ask you for your credentials for the various connections the various connectors that you want to use. But in this particular case, I've already created a connection to my personal OneDrive from Flow. So it just uses that existing connector. You can create connections to multiple targets. So, if you have access to 5 different OneDrive accounts, you can set up different connectors for each of those 5 accounts. In that particular case, if you want to change what it's connected to already, that's something you can go here. If you click on this, then you can see the various connections that you've got, and you can select which one should be the trigger for that, or should be used for that connection. So in this particular case, I would have to select a folder that I want it to watch. It can't watch in this particular case, it can't watch all of OneDrive. You have to tell it a specific folder to look in, but it can also look in subfolders. For various activities, you can have, so a lot of them will have like an advanced options for various things that you might use with the trigger or action. In this particular case, it's just asking if you want to look in subfolders. Also, if you wanted to guess what the file is based on the content. So every flow will have one and exactly one trigger. But after that trigger, you can have what are called activities or actions. So you can have any number of actions or activities up to the total number that are limited by various account levels. In this particular case, for any of the paid accounts, it's 500 actions per workflow. But one of the things you can do is you can have flows called other flows. There are ways to do that. So if for some reason you need more than 500 actions to happen as a result of a flow, there are ways to do that. There are other limits. For instance, you can have nested actions using, various. So in this particular case, there's a connection or a condition where you can say, if these variables or these values are all true, then do this. Otherwise, do that. So these would be nested levels. So you can go up to 8 nested levels deep in any particular flow. You can also have variables that are used in flows, and you can have up to, I believe it's 250 variables in any particular flow. You can also rename any of the actions. So for instance, if I want to call this some file arrives, so you can change the names on all this stuff. Be careful that you don't change the names after you've moved on to other things. a lot of times if a flow or if an action in a flow needs to refer to something that happened previously. So say, for instance, I have what's called a compose, where it basically puts some data together. This compose will have an output, and if you need to refer to it later, it'll refer to the output from this action by the name of the action. So if I were to add, for instance, if I were to add another compose, you'll see that by default it gives it a different name. No two activities or actions can have the same name because, as I said, any of the data that comes out of an action or activity that you would use later in a flow is referred to by the name of that flow. So for instance, in this particular case, if I want to get the outputs from the first compose, I would do that. And you can see if you hover over it, it'll highlight and it'll show you the output, what the data is that's referring to. In this particular case, it's referring to the output from the action that's called compose. So if I were to come up here and change the name of this now, and then come back down here again, you can see sometimes it'll catch it, but sometimes it won't. So it's pretty intuitive, but it doesn't always catch those kinds of things. So be very careful when you're changing the names of things as you're creating your flows. So let's go ahead and get out of this one. So let me walk you through a flow that I've created. So if you click on, if you go into my flows here, I probably should walk you through that. So a couple things you'll notice on this screen when you look at the my flows. So you've got it listed with cloud flows, you've got desktop flows. So I talked about those that run off of a desktop. And then you've got flows that are shared with me. So those are flows that were created by other people, but they've given you access to use. When in those cases, you'll see them under here. Anything you've created will be under the cloud flows or the desktop flows. So for each of these flows, you'll see the last time it was edited. You'll see what type of flow it is. In this particular case, it's scheduled. This runs at 9 a.m. Eastern every day. You'll also see, so in some of these flows, you'll see a little diamond next to it. So what the diamond means is that this particular flow is using a premium connector. In this particular case, I created a custom connector to a NASA API to get a picture that they published every day on their API. And then I post it to my Twitter account. So I'll walk you through that here in a second. So here, this is, again, you'll see the icon here. This runs off a schedule. This is the name that I gave it, was NASA Picture. The last time I edited it was 3 months ago. Then you see some icons here. So if you just want to run it as an ad hoc one-off run, you can click that to run it. If you want to edit it, you can click here. If you want to share it with other people, you would click on this little circle of dots. And then there's some more commands that you have access to. So for instance, export, if you want to export the flow in order to give it to somebody or to put it into a Git repository or to email it to somebody, whatever it might be. Basically, what you can do is you can take your flow, you can export it as a package. It's basically some files that it puts in a zip file. And then it will give you the opportunity to download it. It used to be that the package export wouldn't work in Chrome. I think they fixed that now, so it does work in Chrome. But if for some reason you try to export it and if it's not, you've not seen the download ever happen, try using an Edge browser and it should work fine. You can look at the run history, analytics. You can turn it off and turn it on. If you look at these, you'll see some of them are kind of grayed out with a little cross circle here. That means that it's turned off and it's not going to run, even if the trigger happens. You can delete it. You can also see details. So what you do, if you click on here, this will actually give you a number of things. So you can see the owner over here. You can see they've got this process insights here over here that's fairly new as well. And if they have suggestions on ways that you can improve your work, improve your flow, then you'll see that here. It'll show you the connectors that it's using. So here is that NASA API connector that I created, which is basically a custom connector that I created just for myself to use. And I did it as part of a blog post that I did a few months ago. And it's also connected to my Twitter account. So basically what it does is it goes out to this NASA API, it downloads the image information for the image for today, and then it posts that image to Twitter. You can see various details over here on the flow itself, and then you can see the last 28 days run history. In this particular case, not sure why it's only going back. Oh, I had it turned off for a while. That's why it's only that. But you can also go back and look at all the runs. Now, all runs, that's a little misleading. It won't go back throughout the entire history. It still only keeps something like 60 days or something like that. So you don't actually get all runs when you click all runs. So that's an important thing to remember. If you need to look at the logs from a flow or from a run from the past, you've only got a few weeks of access to it. Anything older than that, you won't have access to anymore. So for any of these runs, you can actually look at the log just by clicking on the date. I won't do that right now, but that gives you access to that. But a couple of details, to see where it succeeded or failed. You'll see how long it took to run. As you can see from this one, it's averaging about 3 or 4 seconds each time it runs. So from this screen, if you want to run it manually, you can do it here. You can create a copy of it. If you've created a flow that you're really proud of and you want to share it with the community, you can submit it as a template and they will review it. And if they approve it, then they'll put it on that templates page for other people to use. You can also export it, as I mentioned, as a zip file so that you can import it into other environments. You can give it to other people, whatever it may be. The important thing to remember is when you share a flow with somebody else, whether you're using the share screen in here to share it with somebody in your environment or in your work group, or whether you send it as a zip file to somebody, when they import it and they want to run it in their environment, they are not going to be using your connections. They will not be using your user when it runs. A flow will always run under the user that it runs under when they run it. So, if it's in your account and it's running, then it runs as your user. If it's in somebody else's account, it runs as their user. And when they import it into their system, they'll get these connectors, but they won't get your connections. They won't get your credentials. So that's important to remember. You're not giving them access. You're not giving them the same access. So if somebody imports it into theirs, they're going to have to create, they're going to have to connect it to their own Twitter account. They're going to have to use this, although, this one doesn't use any credentials, but, if there were credentials for that, they would have to supply their own credentials to use that API. That's important to remember. And that's one of the things that kind of throws people off when they first start using flows is they think that, they create something, they try to run it, it runs fine in their account, they pass it off to somebody else, the other person tries to run it and it doesn't work. Well, that person needs to have the same credential, or not the same credentials, but they need to have their own credentials for those connections. They need to have the same rights to use those credentials. So, maybe you've created something that writes to a database, but the credentials that they run it under doesn't have write authorization. That flow is going to fail when they run it. It may let them connect because they have read-only connections to that database, but when they try to write data, it will fail because they don't have permissions to write. So always remember that the credentials that it runs under is up to that person's account. And you're never giving them your credentials or your rights. So that can throw some people when they first get into Power Automate. I think the next thing we'll do is kind of look at the edit. So if you want to make a change to it, you can do so. But for this particular case, I just want to walk you through a typical flow here. So in this particular case, it runs on recurrent. So it runs at 9 a.m. every day, and that's Eastern time. I've set it as. You can change that. If you click on edit, you can change how often it runs. So you can see that it runs every second, minute, hour, day, week, or month. Those are your options. You cannot run a flow less often than, I think it's like every 2 months, something like that. If a flow has not run in a certain amount of time, the flow will turn itself off. can't remember exactly. I don't think I think it's 90 days, not 60 days. But yeah, over a certain period of time, if the trigger for a flow never happens, the flow turns itself off. And I'm not aware of any way at this time to undo that without going back in and turn or prevent that from happening rather. So keep that in mind when you're creating how often these things run. So if you go under the advanced options here, you can see that I've set it to Eastern time to run every day at 9 o'clock. You can have it run multiple times. So if I wanted to run at 9, 10, 11, 12, then I just click each of these options and it would update that when I save it. By default, in this particular case, it runs at the top of the hour. If I wanted it to run at 9:30, then I'd enter 30 in here or something like that. So that's a recurrence. So the next step here is it retrieves the picture of the day. So that's something that I just built it into the connector. So there's no configuration steps for this. And I can show, I'll show in another video how to create custom connectors, but in this particular case, this just goes out and gets the information from the picture of the day. And then I've got a condition in here. So in this particular case, their picture of the day can either be an actual picture, like a JPEG or a PNG file, or sometimes they put out YouTube videos. And it will, instead of having the picture in the data, it'll just have a URL to the YouTube video. So I've put in this condition here to check and see, okay, is it an actual picture? If yes, if it's a video type, then just post a tweet with a link to the video. If it's not a video, then I'm assuming that it's a picture, because those are the only two types that they've ever put on that feed. In that particular case, in that particular case, I'm using an HTTP call to go out and actually get the data for the video, or not the video, sorry, for the picture. Download that into storage in the flow. So it gets the data from that, and then it attaches that to a tweet and tweets it out. So I tweet out, this is the NASA picture of the day. Here I include the title that came back from the from this API, the copyright information that came back from the API, and then attaching an image attachment with the actual data from the image. In this particular case, it comes back as base 64 text when it gets it from this HTTP call. But Twitter needs it as binary data, so I've got this function here that converts it to the binary data and then attaches it to the tweet. And that gets posted to my Twitter account. So that's a simple overview of a flow. In this particular case, here's the other example. So here, if it's a video, then I'm doing the same thing, the title and the copyright, and that's a picture of the day, and then adding a link to the YouTube video. Let's see here. If you need to make changes, or if you're doing things, it's got undo and redo. You can add comments and various things at various points. An important thing to remember is anytime that you're editing a flow and you click save, those updates are live immediately. Kind of have to be a little careful when you're creating or editing flows to make sure that that you're saving regularly, but also that you're saving what it is you actually want to save. Because there's no version control in Flow. There's no, it's not tied to a Git repository or anything like that. So there's no way to go back to previous versions, at least not at present. That's one of the things that I would love to see improved on, is to get it attached to a Git repository so that it keeps track of changes as it goes, so that you can go back to previous versions. But right now, the only way to do that is when you do a save, do an export or something like that, save it yourself, or else you have to go back and manually edit it the same way again. It also includes a flow checker, so this will automatically check for any errors or warnings. So if maybe I forgot to put in a mandatory field, if I forgot to put anything there, or if it's not certain that a certain data is going to be the right type, that kind of thing, any errors and warnings will be here in the flow checker. And you'll find as you're editing too, it automatically checks as you're working, and you'll see a red dot appear. And I think you saw that on the previous example that I was walking through. So anytime it automatically checks and spots that, or if it run that and it finds errors, you'll get a little red dot there. It tells you there's something you need to look at. And then if you want to run a test of your flow, you can do that manually as well. And the options that'll show up here will depend on, what you've done previously. Whether it's run previously, whether, the kinds of edits you've done, the type of flow that it is. So you might see different options here. So you can do it manually, meaning, I'll run it manually. Automatically, one of the things that it can do with automatically is you can reuse data from a previous run. So, say if I want to try to repost the picture, or test it with the picture that came in 2 days ago, I would select that one and it would use. So this picture of the day that ran a couple days ago, actually, no, that doesn't work for recurrence. That's only on triggers. So it actually would just go out and get today's picture no matter what in this particular case. But if you had a flow where it was passing in data from an external source as part of the trigger, then you could go back and rerun it from that previous day's data based on a previous run, or whatever the previous runs were. So that's a brief overview of the edit screen. Let's go back here. Let me show you examples of previous runs, what you'll see. So let's go like 5 days ago. You'll see here at the top, it'll either you have a green bar or a red bar that tells you whether it ran successfully or not. Recurrence, in this particular case, there's nothing really to show here. It just tells you when it ran. In this particular case, it says 2 p.m., but that's UTC time. And that'll get confusing. Oh wait, no, start time is the original date that it started running. Never mind. But you'll see data there. So here, if I look at that, then you can see the information that came back from that API call. So, got a copyright information, the date, there's a text explanation that's included with that, and a URL to the image. That's the high resolution image. It'll tell you the media type. It's the API version in this particular case, what the name of the image is, and then here's a URL to the lower res image in this particular case. Then in my condition, you can say, it'll tell you whether it came out true or false. In this particular case, it's not a video, so it's false. You can see here, if you click on that, you can see the actual data that came back when it went out to get the image data. So anything that it can't fit in here, you'll see a click to download button, and then it just opens up in another screen. And then you can see the tweet. In this particular case, it gives you the result of what the tweet ID was that went out on the tweet on the Twitter. If you want to rerun a flow from a previous instance, you can do resubmit. And again, if there was different data on the trigger, it would resubmit it with that data. In this particular case, because it's a recurrence, it doesn't matter because it'll be the same every time. From here, if you want to edit it, so maybe you're looking through the data here and you realize that, hey, maybe in addition to video and image, maybe they've started including sound files or something like that, and I need to update my conditions to add another condition kind of thing, then you can just jump right into the edit screen from here. And that just takes you back over to the edit screen that I've shown you previously. So you can see that the edit button takes you right back to the edit screen, so you can make changes, you can save it and redo it. So under monitor, Cloudflow activity, if you want to see not just an individual run, but all of your flows as they're running. So you can see here various things. If I had any desktop flows, you would see them here, but I don't have anything here. Machines, in this particular case, if you have installed the desktop version on VMs or physical machines, you can see references to it here. This was an old VM that I was playing around with at one point, but it's gone now. And then gateways, again, if it has a connection that it's using to an on-prem network instance of some kind, you can see that information in the gateways. All right, so that's about it from the high-level view. In the next video, I'm going to walk through a kind of a more detailed instance of creating a flow from scratch, and then we'll go from there. Thank you, and I appreciate you watching. Goodbye.